Where else, of course, but St. Louis, world headquarters for Bud. But, of course, the big stuff was the drive-aways by the mighty Greyhound. These are all Southland Greyhound cars. $1,838 cars would be sold to the inner city divisions. Numbers that were almost unheard of in those days. Public service. Now, something was happening at Twin Coach that was very nerve-wracking to the boys at GM, or Yellow Coach at this stage of history. Lest I forget, though, I almost got ahead of myself once again, because, you know, I'm not a professional narrator by a long means, or a professional historian. But the big yellow here had a little sister that a whole heck of a lot of people don't know a whole lot about. That's the yellow V. Now she had, the yellow V, if you take a look, was one window smaller and was only a 29 passenger as compared to her big sister, the Z250. Now the yellow Z series was doing very well until 1935, early 36, when this little girl hit the marketplace. The white Super Streamliner Bender body, 54A. Now, at this time period in the United States, Art Deco was coming online hot and heavy. It caught them off guard. It caught them off guard big time too, I want to tell you. From every angle, it was a winner. An absolute winner. The interior had very sumptuous goose down filled seats. But there was something that was even more alarming to the boys at GM. Other than the fact companies were equipping them, the numbers bothered them, but there was still one other little thing that really made GM sit up and take notice. That was the addition of the new burgeoning air conditioning industry that was soon to grow and change this entire nation forever. The mighty Z250 was brought up to speed and streamlined. Of course, Greyhound was right on board almost immediately. And she became the new queen of the fleet. She would continue in production until 1936 and eventually evolved into what was known as the 843. Another picture by young Don Coffin. And while Greyhound had thundering herds of them, unfortunately, it was not available just to Greyhound. Model V, that too would be streamlined. This is an old Tennessee coach. It was a nice looking machine, wasn't it? Mighty Hudson Transit, the short line. The mighty Union Pacific. Now, in the meantime, they had gotten by 1936 up to the point where they were the dominant inner city builder, because this car came along and punched out the Streamline White's sales. Matter of fact, White would only hang on for a little bit longer building inner city coaches and concentrate mainly on transits, where they had a better market. But like I said, in the meantime, back at the factory in the early 30s, the Type 40 emerged in 1931, the first flat-nosed yellow coach. Now, there was just something very, very wrong here, that it was 4 years behind the first flat-nosed twin coaches, which were already impacting, and they really had to do some catch-up here. GM historically, since its conception as yellow coach, always seemed to hit periods of time where they were very lackadaisical or not really paying attention to what really was selling in the world. That's something that would cause GM problems always. Their inability to perceive certain things, although naturally they're the biggest corporation in the world, but sometimes you get so big people get complacent. Hence, they're not building buses anymore today. They took a stab at building a trolley coach, and they numbered it the Type 44. This is the demo shown at the American Electric Railway Association in 1931. Later on, it was designated the 703. As you can see, it had a heck of a rear window to it. Wisconsin Gas and Electric bought 12 of them. Although, as you can see, they opted for a single door version rather than a rear door version. To offset twin coach's success in the small coach field, which twin coach was very good at too, they had tiny coaches. The Model 12 type it was brought into construction in 1933 and designated the 712. Of course, there was also a Model 18, which was even smaller still and earlier than the 712. The 712 had a reasonable degree of success. Now, as you might imagine, the 709, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 722, and 723s were very tiny buses and were not capable of having 2-and-2 seating. Although, as you can see, it's a very posh fabric and nice springs to the seats. But they could not have 2-and-2 of the small coach series. It was called the 722, and a little one a little tiny bit bigger, the 723. Again, though, they were 2-and-1 seating. They weren't 2-and-2 seated buses, even though they were power cars. 3 series of the smaller GM coaches, although, as you can see, this one here is just a tad bit bigger than some of those really little fellas you saw. Public service in New Jersey. 1934 saw streamlining catch up also with the city buses. Probably, again, the epitome of transit coaches was a 700 series of the Art Deco period transit buses. Dubbed the 718 here by Boston Elevated Railway, this was the first coach that had angle drive, so they could mount an engine transversely across the back. That was designed by the famous Dwight Austin, who created the Pickwick Motor Works and the Columbia Coach Company. Now, the smaller Type 30 also known as the 717, was jazzed up a little bit for the Art Deco period. He became the 721. There was also a parlor car version of this created called the 724. But to call the 724 rare would be putting it mildly. There are only 4 coaches ever built with a little slant nose duckbill up front there. 1934 she was online. Streamlining would continue though, like the 717 here, 728, but I guess the girl that followed the 731 here, the 731 sales were very successful, as a matter of fact, with 588 units being sold. Here's the girl that turned the bus fans' heart over. The big 740 yellow coach. Oh Lord, was that, oh that was such a precious unit. A beautiful car, big car. Here's one in service for Chicago Motor Coach. Oh yeah, the 740s, they just warm the cockles of everybody's heart. Here's one for Baltimore. Till the I bumped into the 740s when I used to go back and forth between New York and Boston all the time to my grandmother's house in New York. And until I bumped into the 740s and the beautiful 718s, for me, for all practical purposes, the bus hobby at this stage was still just Greyhound. These coaches are responsible for me realizing, along with some of the other inner city coaches of the time in New York, that the bus business was much more than just Greyhound. It was, of course, obvious that the big 740 would end up being made into a Suburban. But before I get ahead of myself again, there was a little car called the Model S400, which I think is just adorable. She was a combination Buick and Cadillac powered creation, and it just had so much character to it. A little doll baby. There have been several histories on GM done by the various bus fan magazines and whatnot, but I can't find any records of the S400s. So the quantity made, I'm not sure. But isn't that simply just a little classic? Of course, with the Cadillac power, I imagine that little puppy might have been able to hold her own on the road. As I said, I have no idea just precisely how many of them were made, but here's a drive-away from Florida Motor Coach. So at least a half a dozen of them were running around Florida. Again, I don't know how big the production run was on her. I know one thing though, I sure would like to, if I was going to have a restored coach, that would be high on the list of the top 3, I want to tell you. Isn't that precious? The S, I assume, stood for special. They even produced an air porter in the 30s, which I can't find any records on, or just how many were sold, if any at all. But this picture is the load that I had that came from GM itself. I was in there. They charged me $8 a picture, and I bought 175 of them to make the old GM history book. But this stuff here, like I say, this is... But I'll tell you one car that did impress the devil out of me. And that was none other than the mighty Queen Mary's. Oh boy, I mean, woo! First time I ever laid eyes on one of these things, I went, whoa, look at that. But signed up 2007 for Fifth Avenue Coach. Actually, she got her creation first at Chicago. The prototype was first introduced in 1933, obviously for Chicago Motor Coach. And as you can see, it was a revolutionary coach for the United States. Not that it was the first double-deckers, but it was the first quote-unquote modern double-decker. Now, something very unique about 001 here, and that was, of course, that she only had a single entrance door. She didn't have a rear door. Now, the first production model was designated Model 706. It was the only one of its kind, the one with that single entrance door. And the ones that followed behind her were designated Model 720s. Now there's a little bit of difference between the ones that went in New York and the ones that went here. See the two front air scoops for the drivers. And now this is a Fifth Avenue car here. Or so it would appear, but in reality, it's a Chicago. She ended up running in Chicago. But you note the front. You'll see differences very shortly. Now here's a true Fifth Avenue car. 2052. Notice they crowned the roof more. Did away with that big overhang destination sign, and the two front driver's air vents are gone. Now here again is the car showing an early stage with the air vents in the front, Chicago style. Now the production runs were equipped with angle drive. Dwight Austin's famous angle drive was put into them. Like we said, the first single unit car, the 706, had a straight-in engine. My first recollection of the Queen Mary's was we got into New York City, about 5:45 in the morning. The city was pretty dead on a Sunday morning. New Yorkers, even back then, didn't rise very early. And as the bus swung into the city in Upper Manhattan, there was one of these sitting in a turnaround. And my eyes opened as big as saucers, I want to tell you. All in all, between Chicago and Fifth Avenue, 201 of the Queen Mary's would be built. Very much like to do a model of this one day. See if we can talk Bobby Garrett into it. When the people from Corgi were here getting all the information and whatnot to build the 743 models, I tried to convince them that this would have great appeal, but they're not too keen on doing buses that are only one carrier, at best two. They like to be able to get several different paint schemes out of a model that they produce. Who knows? We'll see. One never knows. Maybe times will get better and we'll be able to make one of these. Heaven only knows. It's one of the most historic buses that Yellow Coach ever tackled. The only other people that I know of that ever ran them in revenue service, there are some preserved, 2 or 3 of them around the land, including New York City Transit Authority. But the only people I ever know that operated the car, some were bought used by Coast City's coaches down on the Jersey Shore. And they came from Chicago. And they did have I think several of them. I don't know the exact number. But they ran down there, and if you were one of the youngins back in the 50s down on the Jersey Shore, the 60s, you had a chance to ride them. Now, in the meantime, Greyhound, chomping at the bit, finally convinced GM, here we go. In 1934, GM engineers and Greyhound engineers started in earnest, trying to arrive at a quote-unquote supercoach. An exclusive design, which actually was per agreement, an exclusive design only for Greyhound. There was some hot and heavy work going on, I want to tell you. It wasn't very long before they started to actually zero in on something. Something was definitely taking shape okay. And in 1934, construction was started on 2 experimental cars. The first of the unique Greyhound cars was finally born. The 2 experimental cars are actually put in service. I've seen pictures of them loading at the old street loading Detroit terminal. They ran between Detroit and Chicago for a spell, shaking out all the bugs. Lavish interiors were constructed. They were really trying hard to win those passengers. Very comfortable, well-ventilated coaches. But they weren't quite there just yet. And the X1 and the X2 would finally be put into production as the Yellow Coach 719. Boy, I want to tell you, the fanfare was awesome. First 719 came on board in 1936. She would be heralded from coast to coast. And it actually went away some of the railroad passengers. Real comfort finally came to bus travel. And in those days, oh mercy me, I want to tell you, those seats did recline, and they reclined well. Now, if you'll notice something here, see the air intakes up by the destination sign? They are vertical. That'll be very important in a second. And the toe eyes there. The Art Deco paint scheme was simply stunning. It's something you had to see in real life. Greyhound has one of these, her sisters, one of the Yellow Coach 719 sisters in their historic fleet right now, but it's inaccurately painted. You had to see the real car. In reality, 4 cars were delivered in 1935. although they were kind of kept under wraps. 1936 saw 325 of them made. But there was a problem with the 719. She had some pretty heavy bugs, and she had a completely cast solid front end, which caused some minor road problems. Now this is what the 719 looked like from the rear. If you remember the engineering prototype drawings you saw just a little bit back there, they carried some of that stuff over right to this actual car. Thus, with many refinements, engineering-wise, inside and out. No, outside not too terribly many, but the 743 was born. Now the 743 and I came on scene, probably just about the same time, 1938. Now note the vertical intakes up there by the destination signs are now horizontal. They did opt to stay with that Art Deco paint job. Now remember, this was an exclusive Greyhound car. You could not buy this coach. In reality, the first one, fleet number 646, I think, delivered to Atlantic Greyhound, was delivered in 1937. All in all, 1937, 552 would be built, 38, 479, and the 39, 225, for a total of 1,250